Hey, deserving listeners, sister wives, let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I always say, don't use YouTube as a replacement for therapy. If you need a therapist, get one. You deserve it. Let's watch.
Going on, and I think all three of us had different ideals going into it of how it was going to be.
Okay.
And it wasn't. And then, fast forward, Christine comes in the picture.
And how did that change the dynamic?
That was a struggle for me as well. I actually had a harder time when Christine came.
Why?
All right, so this is like the tell-all, if you will. It's called the one-on-one where they interview. And I will say that the host asks really great questions. The format I appreciate because on other reality shows, and even on this show, when they do the end-of-season wrap-up interviews, when it's a group of people, it can complicate things, whereas when it's one-on-one, the host really can concentrate on one person, and I think the interviewee is usually more safe to just say what's on their mind because the other person is sitting right there anyway. So Mary is saying that when Janelle entered the family, it was really hard for her, and it was particularly hard when Christine entered the family. The host asks why that was. We've heard various things over the years. Mary says, I don't know, I think is a way to just avoid getting into it.
And now there's Robin. And every time you see him having a functioning relationship with Christine, a functioning relationship with Robin, and you're not having that relationship.
I was having the relationship with Cody back then. I mean, we had our arguments, we had our difficulties, and we would work through them. It was definitely a roller coaster.
It sounds like she's saying that she felt close to Cody when Robin entered the family compared to now.
Yeah.
Relationship.
All right, so Cody, tell me about your relationship with Mary.
There's just nothing to talk about, really.
Wow, that's
just
hard to hear.
Like friends. I mean, listen, there was a hardness in our marriage that was so difficult and so antagonistic. I didn't know why we were in it. It took a long time, a lot of counseling as we go through all of this for me to finally go, Mary, I just don't see us getting back together.
Yeah, I mean, it was looking that way. And he says a hardness in our relationship. I don't know what he means by that. It sounds like he's referring to Mary. That's usually what people will be meaning when they're phrasing it that way. He didn't say well, maybe he does, but I'm guessing he means that she was hard. And what does he mean by hard? I'm guessing it means like closed off or something.
And why aren't we getting back together? Because we will go back to the way we were before. There's just no chance that I ever want that again.
But why not leave her at that point?
It's a double standard. They can leave whenever they want. I can't.
It is not a double standard because you emotionally have left and abandoned them in some ways, right?
Well, abandoned, please.
Yeah, it could be phrased that way, and maybe a lot of people see it that way, but I don't think that's how he sees it. It's clearly, according to his reaction, maybe softening it a little bit would get some more buy-in from him. Like, well, yeah, it's a double standard. So I didn't know that. He's saying that the women can leave according to their marriage, but their religion, but he can't. That's interesting. I'm guessing there's some kind of barrier there, even for women to leave. I don't know, culturally or dogma or something. But then he says it's double standard, and yeah, that's a pretty strong word, double standard, because that implies a bigger picture of women having more power than men, which of course is not the case. And then she says, well, it's not really double standard because you have the power to leave them emotionally. And I suppose they all have the power to leave emotionally, right? So, yeah, and because that's the way it looks, right? But the way she phrases it is you have abandoned them. And I think he is consistently pushing back on that kind of narrative. In fact, that might be a big reason why he is distancing himself from the other women, the other adults in the family, because of accusations of abandonment. Those accusations might make sense, might hold water, but either way, it makes sense that he's reacting against it.
Take the word back because
Okay.
I take offense to that word of abandonment. When Mary had an affair, She was leaving my ass because she was like, I'm done with this. I am done with you. I am done. She made it clear to everybody that she was getting out of there.
Yeah. And maybe y'all know. I don't. I haven't looked up anything because I suspect that if I did, I would run into a lot of spoilers for me. But the little bit that we do know, and especially what we heard from Mariah, that Mary was not only talking to this catfisher, but there's receipts or texts or something, some communications that were leaked or found or disclosed that led Mariah to conclude that Mary, this wasn't just a friendship, this was a very deep emotional relationship that Mary was planning on running away. You know, I talked about this before, that one dinner that they had at the lodge with the snow and whatnot, she was saying, don't be surprised if one day you wake up and I'm gone. And I'm pretty sure that's her in the midst of that relationship. She would say that it's because she was planning on leaving to protect the family, which could have been true, but I'm pretty sure that there was at least a time where she was absolutely planning on leaving. And I can even see Mary having some issues with pulling the trigger on that because of her lack of assertiveness. You know, if she was more assertive, she might have been long gone a long time ago, and, you know, maybe even further harmed by the catfisher. I guess one could argue if she was more assertive, she might not even be in the situation to begin with. But anyway, so, you know, he is normal and human and justified in saying, wait, don't accuse me of abandoning. Now, a lot of people, I think, maybe even Mary herself, would say that he had abandoned her emotionally before, and that's what led to her being, you know, I guess one could say that she was committing infidelity, right? And yeah, there are reasons. It doesn't justify infidelity, which I am a pretty rigid therapist and person around this. Because a lot of times people will say, well, you know, she only cheated because he was pulling away emotionally. You can say that that was a factor that led to Mary making a decision, because Mary could have left. She could have left. She could have been upfront. She'd be like, hey, I'm starting to flirt with someone and I need to move on. I need to divorce. We need to figure out something. That would be okay. Absolutely. That would be absolutely okay. To cheat and deceive, to knowingly hurt someone else's feelings and not take the proper steps to make sure that doesn't happen is, it's deceitful, it's lying, it's harmful, it's immoral. Not in like the religious sense, just in this, in terms of my moral criteria of knowingly harming others is immoral. And so he has every right to be upset about that. Again, he might be responsible for having pulled away from her emotionally. I just can't really tell what was happening, because there seems to be some rewriting of history, because I can't tell if in the beginning, 5-6 years ago, if the things they were saying were just wishful thinking or they were obscuring things and there was really a lot of rottenness at the core, or if they were doing well in the past, relatively well, and then now that things are bad, they are rewriting history, which happens all the time. So I just can't, and I'm guessing maybe I'll never know.
She was done with us, and she can't admit it now. Because we rallied, we circled the wagons as a family to protect her when she realized that she'd been duped. She was deceived. She was leaving. She found something better. She was leaving me for a better, richer man. And because we did that.
Richer. I mean, could be. Maybe there's some indication of that he would know about. But I would suspect that's not the case, that wasn't a factor for Mary, but who knows? I could see him thinking it was a factor. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. And if you sign up, please use the link below because it helps us out. So just recently, therapy has become somewhat mainstream. People in my field, including me, have been advocating for this for decades, so it's nice to see. But there's still progress to be made. For example, a recent study found that 26% of Americans are avoiding therapy, even though they might need it, due to a fear of judgment. This is Mental Health Awareness Month, so let's try to change that by encouraging everyone to get the help that they need. As I always say, take care of yourself, and what better way to take care of yourself than to get the therapy that you need? Well, a good option to find a therapist is at BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it's definitely worth giving a try. They have over 30,000 therapists with a wide variety of styles, and BetterHelp makes it a lot easier to shop around because you can easily switch therapists if you need to. So, we're all better with help. Visit betterhelp.com/Kirk to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
In her own mind, she doesn't even realize what happened. She sees herself as a victim, which is true, but that she had done nothing wrong. And she would have never even been the victim if she wouldn't have done something wrong.
Yeah, I agree with that based on what I know, again, especially from Mariah, her take on it. Mariah says that throughout the summer, she was saying like all summer long, I kept telling you, Mom, that you were being catfished. Just imagine, a number of weeks, months, where you're being catfished and your daughter is saying, hey, you're being catfished. And at no point do you test the situation. There's pretty easy ways to test a catfisher, especially an individual that doesn't exist. You can be like, look, if we don't meet up in person and I see a driver's license from you indicating you're the person I've been talking to, then I'm sorry, but we're done. And that breaks my heart because I don't want to end this relationship. But if I can't get confirmation that you're a real human being, a three-dimensional person, at the very least FaceTiming or something. And okay, you have excuses here and there, but eventually, right? Maybe you're sick today or you have an appointment tomorrow, but certainly there's got to be some break in the schedule. So now I understand why people get catfished, and it's not an indictment on Mary's intelligence or wisdom or something. Anyone could be catfished. Anybody. It's when you're a wide open door to that. I don't know if I mentioned this, but for Mary, she was in a neglectful relationship. I mean, even if things were going well with Cody, it's still by its nature in polygamy neglectful, particularly for Mary, because once Mariah had moved out of the house, which or was old enough to not really need Mary as much, then Mary's all by herself, right? And is just twiddling her thumbs and doesn't appear to have much in the way of hobbies or outside interests or friends that she hangs out with a lot or family, especially since they move around all the time. So she was lonely, and that's a wide open door for any form of infidelity. The other, we could speculate, is that her religion and polygamy, and she presents this way, that she doesn't know what she wants or how she feels, and certainly doesn't assert it. And so that is a wide open door for someone to manipulate her, right? Because these individuals, in the absence of knowing what they want and how they feel, they are willing to accept how someone else defines them. And the catfisher was apparently doing that, right? That happened. And that is my understanding, that the way he's saying it is that she was victimized for sure. Absolutely. She was a victim, at the very least, of immoral trickery from someone online, catfishing, but also intimidation and threats and just ongoing coercive, just vile, horrific abuse that she was going through eventually. But as he says, she never would have been a victim if she was not willing to engage in emotional infidelity to begin with. We could argue or speculate that it started out as just friends online, But there was a middle phase there where it was definitely romantic and she was in love and she wanted to run off with this person. And then a third phase where it became abusive and she was terrified. So if she wasn't cheating or open to cheating, she wouldn't have been victimized. She was still victimized. All right, well, let's adjourn there. I have an email that one of the YouTube members emailed in, and I thought it was relevant to reaction videos, so I thought I would read the email and answer the question. It is from middle tier long-term patron and full corn YouTube member Bitch and Bubbles. That's the way Bitch and Bubbles wanted to be referred to, as middle tier long-term patron. Thank you so much for being a patron, middle tier patron and long-term patron. And also full corn YouTube member, which means Bitch and Bubbles has been a member up until this point for at least a year. By the way, I'm recording this episode in early 2025. That feels weird to say that, 25. But this episode might air a lot later on. So by this point, Bitch and Bubbles, you might be a full 2 corn YouTube, because, after 2 years. Anyway, so Bitch and Bubbles asks a good question here. Hey, Dr. Honda, I was wondering if you could talk about the similarities and differences between object permanence in avoidant attachment styles versus object permanence in ADHD. So object permanence as it relates to avoidant attachment style and also to ADHD. I've been listening to the audiobook called Platonic with my spouse, and we were listening to the chapter about attachment styles. I noticed they mention object permanence and how it can play a role in an avoidant attachment style. Once the friendship or relationship is out of sight, it can seemingly easily be out of mind. This reminded me of some of your reaction videos to Love is Blind, where I believe I recall you talking about Shane. Remember Shane and Shayna and Natalie, where you talked about Shane and object permanence as it can relate to the ADHD diagnosis. From what I remember, you seemed to indicate that during times where where Shane's relationship isn't right in front of him, it can be forgotten about. I'm wondering if these two have a level of overlap and how one might delineate between these two. Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. Long-term middle tier patron and full corn YouTube member Bitch and Bubbles. So to review, we have avoidant attachment style in a nutshell. For these individuals, pre-treatment, pre-awareness, they can exhibit what we might call out of sight, out of mind when it comes to close attachments or relationships. And the reason for this is very different from ADHD in that the individual with avoidant attachment style, as a very young child, like 12 months old, learned in order to cope with attachment, rejection, and insecurity, they turned away from relationships and also neurologically, this is all unconscious, neurologically attenuated their emotional life and their noticing of their needs and also their needs for interaction. And they go inward. And so for these individuals, when you interact with them, particularly if they have significant avoidant attachment style, again, pre-treatment, pre-awareness, then they can be very hurtful at times because it might seem as though if you're not right there in front of them, alerting them to your presence and your needs, then they might not seem to indicate that they care at all. So out of sight, out of mind. With ADHD, you might experience a similar presentation or a similar feeling of being neglected by these individuals, but it's due to a completely different thing. It's due to executive function deficits, particularly in working memory. But also, it's possible that for some people with ADHD, they learned early in life that they need to lower people's expectations regarding their ability to keep you in mind. And so they will, even if they have the capacity to keep you in mind, they don't want to set themselves up and for failure, and they don't want to set you up for being disappointed. So they will purposely keep you, or at least indicate that you're not necessarily front of mind, not because they don't care, but because they don't want to hurt people's feelings and they don't want people yelling at them. So they want to create a pattern of prediction so other people can react to them. Anyway, but generally speaking, the reason why people with ADHD might exhibit, and it's not everyone, of course, but if they are exhibiting what looks to be out of sight, out of mind when it comes to relationship, it's due to working memory. In other words, when they are away from you, and it, case by case basis, because it really just depends. It's not like they literally forget you, but I'm trying to think of a scenario like you are telling them, well, let's look at Shane. So I don't know if Shane has ADHD. I'm trying to remember if he actually disclosed that or not. From my memory, I don't think he did. But let's say, for the sake of this thought experiment, that he does suffer from ADHD, and he seemed to exhibit some signs. We can't diagnose from afar. There's a lot of different reasons why he would exhibit the behaviors that I remember off the top of my head, like fidgetiness and other kinds of things. It's kind of interesting to think about because I think that season was like literally 4 years ago. Anyway, so, but the concerning thing about Shane that I remember was that he was connecting with Natalie and then had a date with Shayna and seemingly was flirting as if he wasn't connected to Natalie. And it looked like he was a D-bag or a cheater or something, but I think I might have floated the idea, possibly, that he might suffer from ADHD, who knows, and therefore when he doesn't have Natalie right in front of his face, then he has a hard time feeling her presence, like especially in a situation like that where you've literally never seen either one of these individuals, the two women that he was dating, and you just met Natalie like 4 or 5 days ago. So you don't have that repetition to lock in the notion that you're coupled with someone and that you are coupled with a particular person. And so when Shayna entered his awareness in the pods, then he leaned into it and could have really forgotten, but the way working memory, it's complicated, but and it's unclear if it's exactly related in a situation like this, but the way you can think about it is that when he has Natalie in front of him in the pods, he is constantly reminded of their relationship and her needs and her wants and his attachment to her, his own needs to be with her, his own needs to make her or try to get her to like him. And so all that is in the executive function, especially in a new relationship when it really hasn't locked itself into longer term memory and habit. So he's remembering because he's in the midst of a conversation with Natalie and his working memory, and I'm pointing to the prefrontal cortex area, that is constantly working and reminded of Natalie and his needs and her needs and all that stuff, okay? Then Natalie is in a different pod or goes back to the lounge. Maybe a couple hours passed. Maybe he has a drink. He goes back into the pods, and then here comes Shayna. Well, ADHD can create one of the main effects, actually, if not the defining effect of ADHD, is working memory deficit, in that the individual has like the fact that right now, as I'm talking, I am following a string of thoughts that all fit within one overall topic sentence in response to Bitch and Bubbles' email. The fact that I can even remember Bitch and Bubbles' name is part of my working memory. Ask me tomorrow or 6 weeks from now who it was that emailed in or what the question was. I'm going to be less likely to remember that. So right now I have all these details and bullet points that are constantly churning around in my working memory, ready to go. But over time, that starts to go away. So with Shane, he might have, with Natalie in front of him, that is churning, and then as she goes away, it's much more of a drop off regarding his working memory that other people would consider to be unusual. And then as he is interacting with Shayna, he is not really feeling or remembering or sensing that automatic editor in his mind of like, this is not Natalie. Not only you don't want to hurt Natalie's feelings, but also you're trying to be with Natalie. You don't want to be with Shayna, really. So there's that. People make arguments about lust and whatnot because there was elements of that which, can cloud judgment and maybe even working memory. Anyway, so with ADHD, when you interact, if you have a partner with ADHD, then it can be that way. I think more specifically, because I've treated a lot of clients in this situation, that with ADHD, a very common scenario that I've seen in treatment is that you have the non-ADHD partner will ask, because when you live together, there's a lot of things you have to accommodate each other on. Like, hey, could you make sure you do this? Like a really common thing is that people with ADHD have a hard time completing tasks because of working memory and attention. And so when it comes to putting away all the dishes or putting away all their clothes or making sure that they do all the steps involved in taxes or making sure they hit all the errands that they're supposed to do before they come home or making sure they, when they're cooking a dish that they do every step well and put everything away, there's just a lot of steps, and working memory is very critical in being able to complete all those things. And especially at the end of the day, when you've been really, as an ADHD individual, really been working real hard overtime to make sure that you keep it together at work or something or with your kids. And then at night, you just kind of want to relax, as people will do. And ADHD will, people will really want to relax when they have ADHD because they've been working real hard cognitively. And their working memory just goes off a cliff. And so if you have a partner that you've been asking, hey, when you cook, can you please, or when you when you take your clothes off at night, can you make sure or when you are using the clothes dryer, can you please empty the lint thing and throw it, or when you are taking the dog out to go to the bathroom, can you make sure you lock the door when you come? I mean, and you make these requests, and when they're repeatedly not met, these requests by the partner with ADHD, it can feel hurtful because it's hard to delineate, as Bitchin' Bubbles is, I think, trying to figure out. Is it avoidant attachment because of that out of sight, out of mind? Is it ADHD, or is it just neglect? The person is just not putting enough effort into it. It's really hard because, people with ADHD have all the same problems that everyone else does in terms of, passive aggressiveness or just not putting enough effort into something. And it's really hard to know. Generally speaking, the kinds of examples that I gave, if there was a problem, I would assume it was and the person did have ADHD, I would assume it was ADHD because it's like an almost automatic thing that can happen. So yeah, you ask how to delineate, say you have someone who is out of sight, out of mind, and it's hurtful to you, and you're like, is it ADHD, is it avoidant attachment, or is it something else? Well, you have to do, as a therapist, as a clinician, you have to do a full assessment. And they present in very different ways. Their overall presentation, avoidant attachment is very particular, and ADHD is very particular, and there's really not much overlap. Plus, you can have ADHD and avoidant attachment at the same time. So which one is it? It might be hard to conceptualize that. So, yeah. And this is last point here is that there's this thing online on TikTok where people will say, is your partner out of sight, out of mind? Then he has ADHD. And these kind of simplistic ways of diagnosing or understanding complicated mental conditions is misguided at least, and possibly just horrifically damaging in its messaging and what it's quote unquote teaching people. So, and Bitchin' Bubbles, you're not doing this, but I think that your question might be kind of along those lines of, well, if someone's being out of sight, out of mind, which one is it? the bigger question that we want to zoom out on is how do we fully assess an individual, or how do we fully get to know ourselves? And instead of just looking for these individual little details that might align with a particular diagnosis, put the diagnosis. And this is what I teach my students, which is don't think about diagnosing. Think about assessing. Think about assessing the individual. Then once you have assessed the individual, then start thinking about diagnosing. And when you do that, I think you're much more likely to find accurate results. And again, if you're not a mental health clinician, it might be really hard. ADHD is very difficult to assess. When I diagnose someone with ADHD, it is no small feat. It can take me 20 hours at least of testing and assessment. It's complicated. There's so many reasons why someone would be distractible or absent-minded or having difficult in school or seemingly forgetful or inattentive in a relationship or having difficulty staying on task, being depressed. There's all sorts of effects that can come from ADHD, and it takes a long time to assess because all the things that I just mentioned, you could be depressed, you could be anxious. In fact, usually when I come across people of any age, kids or adults, who present with what looks to be ADHD symptoms, after I do a full assessment, they don't have ADHD. They have one of the more common conditions like depression and anxiety, which are way more common than ADHD, and of course can create a lot of the same, if not identical, symptoms, right? But when you actually look into it, you find especially when you do working memory assessments and testing for ADHD, and not just asking them to tell you about their experiences, then you are much more likely to zero in on differentiating between an actual brain disorder, executive function deficit, versus not, because if someone is anxious and they're distractible and they're having a hard time with staying on task, that kind of stuff, when you actually test their cognitive ability, they don't have the signs of ADHD, and so you can rule out ADHD. Does that make sense? Anyway, so yeah. And conversely, you can have someone that doesn't seem to have any of the pitfalls of ADHD, and yet they do actually have the condition, the mental condition, the deficit in their executive function, but it's not really creating a lot of problems because their life is set up in a way that helps them, or they understand it and they have a lot of workarounds and their system understands. Anyway, so that does it for psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please, that doesn't do it for psychology. That sounds like I'm ending the podcast. That does it for that episode. And please take care of yourself. And if you want to email, this is from an email, I believe. You can email in via the website if you want to contact me. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.